Here we are. We're about to start our larger group time together, and one of my roles is to introduce Jane Anderson, the Associate Conference Minister with the Wisconsin Conference United Church of Christ. As many of us know, Jane was also a pastor here for a couple of years. Jane, thank you so much for coming. I was speaking with Jane the other day about the Isaiah Project and kind of how this came up. Jane is really well connected with the conference, with other churches in the conference. And the conference is connected nationally. So there's trends, there's observations, there's things taking place. And really that is the umbrella that Jane is here to share with us today to help connect our work to the bigger picture, to what's unfolding around us, and not just in the United Church of Christ, but really in Protestant world and the Christian world,
right?
Nationally,
right.
And so, we've got this handout, and Jane will explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, why don't we pass it out, Nick?
Okay,
that would be great.
We'll do corruption.
So, first of all, I want to thank Pastor Nick and Nancy as chair of the Isaiah Project, and all the project leaders for inviting me here today to share with you some trends that we are noticing in the wider church. This is kind of a good news, bad news situation. And being the Cassandra that I am, I'll start with bad news first and get to good news later on. But information about this shifting landscape, and it is a shifting landscape, in our denomination and across all denominations, may help all of you as you move forward in faith and as you seek direction for our faith community. I'm still a member here. Or at least I'm hopeful that it will be helpful. Please know that I'm not an expert in this field. Much of the information about the trends that we are seeing, I am sharing with you today, comes from three main sources. CARD, which is the United Church of Christ Center for Analytics and Research Data. And they do all this kind of work. Also from the Lake Institute, which you may or may not have heard of. The Lake Institute is part of Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, which fosters a deeper understanding of the dynamic relationship between faith and giving through research and education and public conversation. And they do that work in an ongoing way. So we get regular data from them. Also, the data that we have in our own conference. And finally, what you'll see also in the packet is your own church's reported data over the past 11 years, which was part of your profile as you sought to find new ministerial leadership for the church. In short, I will talk about the trends that we are seeing on a national, conference-wide, and local church level. Some of which will apply to you, some of which you're further up the bell curve, as I would like to say, in the life cycle of the church. Because all churches have a life cycle like we have a life cycle. But where you are is further up the bell curve. So does that make sense? Is that kind of jive with what you anticipated? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Please know I'm open to questions as we go along, and we will have some time at the end for questions and answers. But if there are clarifying questions that you have as I go along, please just raise your hand and ask. Afterward, there'll be time to talk together in some small groups about these trends and how it affects you as a faith community. Okay, I'd like to begin by offering some context for the trends that we have been experiencing, probably more keenly since the pandemic than ever before, or at least we're taking notice, sitting up and taking notice in a way that we didn't do before. But those trends have been very much front and center for many, many years. In 2008, Phyllis Tickle wrote a very important book entitled The Great Emergence: How Christianity is Changing and Why. It was, for me and others, very helpful in providing prophetic insight about the shifting landscape of Christianity and the church. And much of what Tickle wrote has panned out in the years following. So I'd like to share with you, if I may, 7 key insights from her book, which I think will help frame for you some of the data that I'm going to share with you. It may help us better understand the ever-changing church world. So Phyllis Tickle, in her book, explores the idea of emergence within Christianity, suggesting that the church undergoes a significant restructuring or transformation about every 500 years. Think about the Protestant Reformation. That's the one that we all go to because we're children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of the Protestant Reformation, right? But we are now in a 500-year cycle of that being part of a new sense of great emergence. Tickle says that about every half millennium, Christianity experiences a serious and significant upheaval, or what she likes to entitle a rummage sale, where old structures are discarded and new ones emerge. And just as a rummage sale, I know so many of you are very familiar with that, involves sorting through old items, discarding what is no longer useful, and discovering hidden treasures. Tickle sees that these periods of upheaval in the church are opportunities for renewal, for reformation, and for the emergence of new theological and ecclesiastical, meaning church, for those of you who don't know that big theological word, ecclesiastical paradigms, new frameworks. The second thing she says is that the great emergence, most of these upheavals that are happening, what she terms as the great emergence, began in the late 20th century and are now continuing through the 21st century. So this period sees a reevaluation and a restructuring of Christianity in response to various cultural, social, and technological changes. Those 3 things: cultural, social, technological changes. Third thing, there is a shift in authority. One of the central themes of the book is the shift of authority within Christianity. Tickle suggests that the authority of traditional structures, such as denominations and hierarchical leadership, is waning, while the authority of individual believers and non-institutional expressions of faith are on the rise. God is doing something new. Now, not to toot our own horn as a UCC judicatory, but we're already ahead of the ball curve on that one, given that our polity, how we are governed, has its roots in the local church and in individual believers. You could say, and many have said, the UCC is a grassroots organization. It's part and parcel of why I'm UCC. The fourth thing is the influence of technology. Tickle highlights the impact of technology, particularly the internet and social media, on the Great Emergence. These platforms provide avenues for new forms of religious expression, communication, and community building outside of traditional church structures. We say this takes a huge leap forward. We saw that this took a huge leap forward during the pandemic and will be vitally important to the ministry of the church going forward. And I'll say more about that later. But we cannot underestimate what technology has done and will continue to do in the development of whatever God is doing as a new thing. Fifth, religious pluralism. Her book discusses how globalization and increased interaction between different religious traditions have led to greater religious pluralism. This pluralism challenges Christianity to adapt and to engage with other faiths in new ways. On a personal note, I have to just say, since I've come into this position, and some of you know, I serve not only Northeast, but I also serve the Southeast Association. And one of the greatest joys for me in this is that I automatically have a seat on the executive committee for the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. I see on a monthly basis that interaction and what community leaders across religious traditions do for the city of Milwaukee. It is amazing ministry to see that kind of cross-fertilization of efforts and how it is that we covenant together to continue to do mission and ministry for the greater good of Milwaukee. Sixth thing, reimagining church. Tickle suggests that the Great Emergence necessitates a reimagining of what it means to be church. This includes exploring alternative forms of worship, community, and spiritual practice that may diverge from traditional models. And last but not least, continuity and change. Despite significant changes brought about by the Great Emergence, Tickle emphasizes the continuity of Christian faith and tradition. She sees the emergence of new expressions of Christianity as part of a larger ongoing narrative of God's work in the world. That's where the hope lies, folks. The question that I always wonder about is whether or not we can, as we said in our small groups, be open-minded, listen, and can we adapt to inviting and incorporating these new expressions that may be emerging and receptive. Overall, the Great Emergence, which I commend to all of you to read, offers a framework for understanding the state of Christianity and the ongoing process of change and adaptation within the faith tradition. Does that all make sense? Any questions about that? Okay. So one of the signs that we're seeing in a time when the church needs to have a rummage sale is the sign of decline. This is the bad news part. All mainline churches and denominations have experienced decline, both in membership numbers and Sunday morning participation for the last 25 years. In the last decade, the rate of decline has sped up significantly. We have seen significant decline as well in the fundamentalist evangelical traditions. So it's not just Protestant, mainline, it's just not Catholic, it is across the board. We are seeing decline. In the United Church of Christ, 25 years ago, we had 1.4 million members. As of 2022, we listed 800,000. That's a loss, if my math is right, of 600,000, pushing upward of half of the membership that it was 25 years ago. In the conference, we have also noticed the decline in several ways. The overall membership based on church membership data, the steady decline in local and wider church giving, and participation level in worship and church school attendance. In 2012, the conference had 48,492 members with an average weekly attendance of 18,751. And the Christian education faith formation attendance was 10,160. That's in 2012. 11 years later, it dropped to 33,988 members, a loss of 14,504 members, with an average weekly attendance of 8,914, a loss of 9,800 plus members. And the average Christian faith formation attendance was down to 5,132. A loss of over 5,000 members. Yeah.
How was the loss defined? So was it people didn't show up, people didn't give?
This is attendance and participation. This is attendance and participation.
So they still could be members, but there's nothing.
They could, yeah. Yeah.
Does live streaming have any?
We count those live streaming members. You ask Pastor Nick, we'll count those live streaming members. Yeah, it does have an effect. And we'll talk a little bit about the technology. And I'll talk about a little bit about the positive piece of that technology in a different way a little bit later.
Is there data as to live streaming people, how many are members?
So we don't have enough data yet to track that for sure. And part of the reason for that is a number of different things. Not everybody streams in the same way. So if you're live streaming through Facebook, you can see who's attending. If you're live streaming through YouTube, you can't see. You can see how many hits you get, but you cannot see who's actually attending, right? So part of that is that kind of depth that we don't have We don't have consistency of platforms across churches and how they're doing it. And we don't have consistency of people who are tracking it in quite the same way. What we do have, however, and I'll talk more about this later, is that we do know that there is a direct correlation between the number of churches that have some virtual platform and a greater reach of people. That's what we do. They extend their reach and thereby also extend their participation level and broaden their giving level. And I'll say more about that later. Other questions? The loss of membership over the 11 years is significant, but the greater loss is participation in worship and Christian education and spiritual formation. It is about half of what it was 11 years ago. Currently, 98, now this is the most staggering statistic. I have to take a breath every time I do it. 98 of the 219 churches in the conference are worshiping 30 members or less. And 11 of those are worshiping 10 or less. That's a staggering statistic. And don't think it doesn't have me concerned. It does.
Do those have churches to go to, or?
Yes, they do. The national average for in-person attendance in worship as reported by CARD has dropped from 77 to 47 from 2015 to 2023. So 5 years before the pandemic, the average church was worshiping 77, and now it's 43 across the United Church of Christ. So this goes directly to what Phyllis Tickle was saying about the great emergence and a rummaging. We need to be thinking about, do our structures meet the hunger and need that is out there? Okay, in contrast, and this is the flip side of this, in contrast, the influence of technology, the percentage of people taking advantage of virtual worship through various platforms, live streaming, social media, audio, podcasts, video conferencing, has dramatically increased. We all know that the pandemic played a huge part in this, but surprisingly, the numbers continue to increase. At the height of the pandemic, 38% of people were worshiping virtually. In 2023, it's climbed to 85%. 85%. Worship participants are looking for new forms of religious expression and community engagement. And let me say this, and I can't say this strongly enough, and this is a teaser for you to come to the Northeast Association annual meeting. I'm putting my plug in right now. While there is a place for virtual worship that is an extension of the Sunday morning experience, more and more we are seeing virtual worship opportunities that are independent of the in-person gathered experience.
Can you say that again,
Yeah,
please?
what is it?
So, while we know that there is a place for live streaming our worship service, which is really basically an extension of the in-person worship experience. more and more people are looking for virtual worship experiences that are independent of what happens on a Sunday morning, that are designed and catered to the virtual platform. Flexibility, whatever. When I talked with the leadership team for Isaiah Project, I raised the example, the UCC Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, developed a 30-minute worship experience as a podcast. They get more people participating in that podcast than they do on the virtual experience of the Sunday morning worship. I mean, like 6 times more. The numbers are staggering. So, people are craving not just flexibility, but I think they're craving something different. Yes, Sarah.
I'm picturing the interaction, like an interactive.
Right, a Zoom thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, they have online Bible studies, but that being able to participate, even when that started responding to people on Facebook.
Right.
There's so many people that are interacting that way.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, Bruce.
Are there any UCC podcasts?
There are lots of them.
Are they
Yeah.
related to this area of Wisconsin?
Yep.
They're-
Yeah, you can just go out there, Google it, however you want to do it. Yeah, there's lots of different things, and not just podcasts, but other virtual platforms and interactions, and people developing community connections through online platforms. So, yeah, Bill.
One of the things, what happened to people during COVID wasn't just a church thing, it was their whole lives that were affected. And now afterwards, it's not just changing how they are church, it's changing how they work, it's changing how they interact socially. I wonder if any correlation has been done in terms of church versus vocation.
Sure.
And what similarities and differences would
That would be a great Pew Research question, and I'm sure that it's been done. But again, these are what I said at the beginning. These are cultural shifts, they're social shifts, they're technological shifts. This is an ever-changing landscape. And just when I think I've gotten up on the latest whatever, all I have to do is turn to my friend Steve Herby over here and find out, oh, gee, I didn't know about that. It's constantly changing. We're having to look at, okay, this is an aside. So we're having to look at what the influence is on the ethics of pastors with the development of AI and sermon prep. And wow, how we hold them accountable. This is interesting stuff, right? I can just say, when you ask the work question, so pre-pandemic, I put 32,000 miles a year on my car for work, meeting with all these churches.
Yep.
Now I'm down to 20,000 miles. 12,000 miles. I've reduced my carbon footprint by 12,000 miles. I'm so happy about that.
30%.
Not to mention the effect on my body. So I'm really happy about that. Any other questions before we go on? Yeah.
I just sort of have a comment with all the online interaction and such. Are we hurting at all in outreach to people? and we Jesus' hands
right?
in the community. And
How do we do that?
with that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. It's one that we are in this shifting landscape still trying to figure out. How do we not only worship in a virtual space, but how do we build community? How do we build mission and service? How do we build stewardship? And what are the ways that we, these are things that you all need to struggle with as part of it. Because this is part and parcel of the question for you going forward. So let's hold on to that, because I think that's the kind of thing to be talking about maybe in the work going forward. Let me come back to this a minute. The demographics of church participants are also part of this rummage sale that we need to think about. They're a key marker, at least, to take note of. Most of our participants across the United Church of Christ and all mainline denominations are primarily white senior adults, 65 and older. That's the largest group of participants. In the last 3 years, that demographic has jumped to 45% of church participants. So 45% of the UCC is white and 65 and older. The second largest group are the middle adults, 35 to 64. That's a big group. That group is trending downward from 32% to 29% as of last year. Young adults now, as of the end of 2023, only make up 9% of our participants. Youth, 7%. Children, 10%. So what does that tell you, folks? A good question.
Reading like Europe.
And look at the age of the people in this room.
Right.
Look at the age of the people in the sanctuary on Sunday.
Will all the children please stand up?
That's a spirit. It begs the question, who's at the table?
Right. It does beg the question, who's at the table? And who's making decisions about the futuring by who's at the table?
Exactly.
You need to be thinking about that. Who do you invite to the table?
Yes.
And how do you invite them? Yeah. Okay, when I look at your own 11-year report, I have to tell you, I see similar signs of decline. In 2012, you reported 1,667 members with an average weekly attendance of 421 and 87 in Christian education and faith formation. In 2022, your reported membership was not too bad. It went down to 1,529, although Mary Jo says that the number is much smaller than what is reported.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. The average weekly attendance dropped to 207, with still 84 in Christian education. So that proves really well. Yes, stand up and give yourself a hand, Sarah. Now, I understand from Nick that these numbers may be slightly underreported for weekly attendance, but regardless, you still see the downward trend. showing participation in worship and Christian education is about half of what it was 11 years ago. When I came to the church in 1995, it was 1,880 members. Yeah, Steve.
Well, I was just going to point out that one of the cultural changes that is going on is a reluctance to become a member of most any.
Right.
That would, yes.
Right. And the other piece though is, and we've already made this shift in the conference. We're trying to do it for the 11-year reports, but it hasn't. We've been through a lot of transition lately. To stop just measuring membership numbers alone, but participation numbers. How do we capture participation levels at everything, not just Sunday morning, and stop paying attention to Sunday morning experiences? I can remember, I would go to these clergy meetings when I first came to town. First of all, I was the only woman in the room.
Yay.
And second of all, these guys, these senior pastors would sit around and talk about how many members they got at this thing and how many members they got at this. And the sole focus was the bigger the membership, the better a church you were. Or the bigger the, youth group you had, the better the church you were. And it was all based on an attractional model of church that was developed out of the 1950s and 60s that said, essentially, the field of dreams concept. If you build it, they will come. That is no longer the case. It is no longer the case. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to have excellent worship and excellent youth events and excellent children's. All of that is really important. And you saw from this morning, what a wonderful offering that the children did today. I mean, it was just great engagement. But if you think that by building the best programming, you're going to become the attractional church, that's not going to happen. That's not what people are. Cindy.
I was wondering how the 2011 is the date you're using. How did that relate to our shifting of Sunday school? We shifted our whole Sunday school program to a different model. Does anybody know when?
I do. We did. Yes, I do remember that because it was. Let's see. It came in '95.
Repeat the question.
I'm sorry. The question was there a shift in the participation level based on when we shifted the Sunday school model? And we went to a rotational model of leadership when we left the daycare, the preschool, not daycare, preschool leave. We asked them to leave so that we could do this rotational model thing. And I think that was like 5 years after I came. So around 2000, is that right?
Okay, so it was 11 years before that.
Yeah.
Which is kind of,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a good example of it didn't change.
Right. Yeah, it didn't change. Yeah. Okay. All churches and indeed nonprofits have experienced decline also in giving over the last 11 years. Nationally, we have seen a downward trend in our church's wider mission, which is the primary funding source for our mission and ministry, and indeed everything that happens in the Wisconsin Conference and on a national level. Our OCWM pledges are based on church membership and church dues. So as membership goes down, so does OCWM dues. So do the association dues. So as churches decline, these giving for these vital support of the mission and ministry of the church also goes down. However, overall, while OCWM giving is down, it should be noted that at the same time, we have diversified our giving opportunities. Giving on a per capita basis is up overall when you consider the broad range of giving opportunities to help support the life of the wider church. And by collaborating also on giving and investment, which is up. And we've seen this firsthand as more churches have become involved in the Wisconsin Foundation. So diversifying the opportunities for giving has also made a significant impact on the overall increase in giving, which is important to note and important for you to take note of as a church. Okay, lest you think that I'm only being a Debbie Downer today and talking about the negative trends that point to decline in the church, I also want to talk about some of the positive trends that we are seeing in the life of the church. There's a huge document that in your packet, Nick has put a QR code to, and it's the FACT 2023 survey that comes out of CARD. This report shares some positive information, particularly in mission and identity. One of the trends that we are seeing in the last 3 years is that there has been an increase in reporting that churches, their congregations, have a clear sense of their mission and purpose. Now, this is a page out of my own experience here, but when I came to town in '95, people either saw you as Roman Catholic or Lutheran. And they didn't know what to do with the UCC. Yeah, they had no sense of who we were about. And members even struggled with a sense of who are we and what are your mission? But then that Still Speaking campaign came along, and it identified not only a logo and an ad for us, but core values and vision of who we are. And all of a sudden, members could talk then. And they had conversations about it with their Lutheran friends and their Catholic friends and all that other. So all I'm saying is a clear sense of mission and purpose for who you are and what you're to be about is really key as an upward level of participation. This is crucial for us as faith communities, being able to understand who we are and our purpose for being, not to mention what it is that makes us unique from other nonprofits, is vital to manifesting that mission and purpose, having it lived into reality. 2, churches are actively reaching beyond themselves, seeking mission and ministry partners in their local community and beyond. Those churches are seeing growth. I credit Maynard Beamer all those years ago for moving us to being a mission partner church and having members take the lead on each of those mission partnerships. It's really important. But also collaborating in that mission partnerships across the churches. We don't need to be siloed, folks. And the churches that are collaborating are growing. Also, while we are predominantly white, congregations now are actively seeking to be diverse and welcoming of all people. And those are the churches that are really growing, because people want their faith community to look like the rest of their lives, especially young people. Churches that are genuinely welcoming and inclusive, particularly of people who have been marginalized, are growing. Also, churches that are welcoming to working with ministry partners, not just ecumenically, but across religious traditions, will broaden and deepen their ministry. So those are some positive trends. Lastly, let me note that the real measure of church vitality is not just in the numbers, but in spiritual vitality of its members. The stronger churches across the denomination are ones that are spiritually vital and alive. And these churches that are also willing to meet new challenges, not just in technical ways, but real adaptive ways. Ones that together have been spiritually discerned by a community under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Those are the vital churches. Let me also say this, there is no singular cause or effect for these trends. Everybody thinks that if we can just get to the root cause, we can reverse it, you know? Mm-hmm. Or worse, I have churches that say to me, well, if those young people would just stop being so lazy and come to church on Sunday morning, right? We're doing the demonizing for the technology influence, right? None of that is helpful. It's not helpful to your future. These cause and effects of cultural influences and developments are the result of various things, not any one thing. And there is no prescriptive solution to shift the trends. I can't write you a script, folks. Just do this and you'll see a difference. It's an experiment. It's an experiment. And it's one that's going to continue to shift and change. However, churches that respond and healthfully adapt to a new way of being church will be the ones not only to survive, but thrive. I think that the data can help inform our response to these cultural trends in the following ways. Much of what I want to say after having read not once, but twice your Vandersall report, you've already captured in that report. But let me name what I see. And these are the things that I think to pay attention to. Embrace technology. Integrating virtual reality or augmented reality into religious practices could enhance accessibility and engagement for members and those who are not members. The one example I wanted to point out to you was we have a church that during the pandemic started doing really good virtual worship. I mean, really good virtual worship. They had a really tech-savvy pastor. They have people tuning in from Japan and Korea and all across the world, not singularly, but on a regular basis. How do they integrate those folks? Embrace technology. Community outreach. Establish programs to address social issues like homelessness, poverty, mental health, demonstrating the church's commitment to serve humanity. We need to be who we say we are as disciples of Christ. Third, environmental stewardship. Leading initiatives to promote sustainability and care for the planet, aligning with the principles of stewardship and respect for creation. It was your children's message this morning. Fourth, interfaith collaboration. Foster dialogue and partnerships with other faith communities to promote understanding and tolerance and mutual respect. There is not a week that goes by that there is not a new hate crime somewhere in Wisconsin. And by the way, our UCC churches are now being targeted. We have had numerous churches that have had to get restraining orders, not just from outside, but against their own members around this issue of tolerance. Okay, I don't want to go down that road because I get really upset. Youth engagement, creating dynamic programs and events tailored to the interests and needs of younger generations, ensuring their active involvement and leadership within the church. Inclusive practices, embracing diversity in all of its forms, ensuring that everyone feels welcome, valued, regardless of race or gender or sexual orientation or socioeconomic status. Holistic well-being, providing resources and support for physical, emotional, and spiritual health, recognizing the interconnectedness of mind, body, and spirit. And creative worship. Explore new, innovative forms of worship, music, art, storytelling, to inspire, uplift congregants in meaningful ways. And the last two, education and dialogue. Offer opportunities for lifelong learning and open discussion on theological, ethical, and social issues, encouraging critical thinking and personal growth. And last but not least, global connection. Build relationships with churches and communities around the world, fostering solidarity and cooperation in addressing global challenges and promoting peace and justice. Now, I'm proud to say that this church has done much of that work for many, many years. And I was proud to be part of it, and I'm still proud to be part of it. And I want you to hear that in as much as you're struggling with exactly the next thing, know that just take the steps. You're going to wander in the wilderness for a little bit, but God will provide. God will provide. As you think about the Isaiah text that you have before you as part of this project, and think about where we are in Lent, I'd like to close by sharing with you a spiritual reflection that comes from the Anam Cara Ministries. I think it speaks to the season that you're in, both culturally and liturgically, and may set a spiritual framework for how we prepare ourselves to be responsive to what I see as the great emergence of the church. Okay. Jesus was a wild kind of guy, wasn't he? Not bound by roles and expectations of him. He would touch the untouchables, overturn carefully laid tables, take off time to go out into the wilderness whenever the Spirit prompted him. We don't often see him preaching indoors. And one of the few times we do, the roof gets ripped off, letting the outdoors in. He's usually on the shore, or on a mountainside, or in a boat, or in a desolate place, as people would gather around to hear. His predecessor, the one who would make a way in the wilderness, John the Baptist, went literally out and rewilded himself, living off the land as he ushered in the kingdom. He made a wild way for the incarnate one to be present in the structures of our world. Jesus enters into the created world as an expression of the ultimately untamed one. People always thought he was going off the rails as he welcomed in rejects and criticized the secure, as he disappeared at random times of day, just when he had the most people asking for him. But he was an embodiment of the heart of God for God's people. It may have been a different time, 2 millennia and an industrial revolution ago, and another place, the landscape of the Fertile Crescent, there on the edge of the Mediterranean. But there are still invitations for us in even this one small aspect of how Jesus lived on earth. What would it look like for us to lean into our own wildness, the wildness of the earth surrounding us? What might change if we chose to leave some of the comfortable structures we have made in our lives and reintroduced some unpredictable life into the mix? What does the land around you in particular offer to your imagination as you consider the wildness of Jesus and many of the saints in the centuries after? I believe God is ushering in a new age in the life of the church. Not just remaking it, but resurrecting it from its old structures and creating something new. And I think the question is, are we open and willing to respond to the Spirit's leading? Maybe so. That's what I have for you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions? Huh?
I said about 600.
About 600. Well, good. Yeah. I don't know that I have all the answers,
Well,
but
there you
I don't know if the Alliance Church is feeling the reduction.
they are. Are they? They are. Yep.
What about the Catholic churches?
Yep. The biggest decline, as if you look at the statistics, the biggest decline is in the Catholic churches is in the last 11 years. But remember
that.
why?
Why?
So remember, there's no one influence.
Right.
But think about it. Integrity. How many kids have suffered abuse? Not just in the Catholic Church, in our own church as well. You know, values that don't no longer align with who they have become. Social values and structures and laws and traditions that no longer align. It doesn't look like who we are as a society. So vision and values are really an important piece of it. Okay. Yeah. Other questions? Nick?
I just want to say thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
The the content that we've been exposed to today is not new to me or my colleagues being part of the 2030 Leadership Initiative at the UCC Church. So I'm fairly well connected with young leadership across the country. We have seen the same slate of challenges, whether it's in an urban church or a rural church in Montana or in Florida. And we've furiously been sharing ideas, sharing what's working, forming new cohort groups. And yet we know the reality around us is changing.
Right.
And so I'm thankful that we're aware of everything we can do to be, as a church community, more aware. My formative years were in an attractional, programmatic Presbyterian church in
Yep.
the 90s.
Yep.
And I, along with many of my friends, know that that is not the way forward. And we are open. And I think one of the best ways for the Isaiah Project to really continue to flourish is for us as a community to make these efforts and be creative and be courageous together, not lean on a pastor with answers.
It's a discernment process. And I really do believe that the Spirit is leading. But we have to get still and really listen. And take it all in. I mean, you've done a lot of really good work over the last couple of years. And there's a lot to process in them. But just take it one step at a time and listen. And, you know, if you need to regroup, you regroup. I mean, there are no prescribed answers to this. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
We are the Church of the Open Door. Whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here.